Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today is going to be our first 2025 Jaguars mock draft. This is our way too early version, so if that triggers you, we're going to do one of these a year, right? Everyone does these after the draft. Usually it's, in the end of April, but I wanted to make sure I did my scouting. I checked out a lot of the players in this next class and did some good thinking on this so I could actually present you guys with some good content here and some names to look forward to that we could be talking about at the end of this year and trying to get an idea of what direction the Jaguars might go. And so we're going to get our first look at my big board heading into the college football season. We're actually going to look back a little bit at the 2024 draft and some of the mock drafts that we did early on. We actually had some players, I think, that were in consideration for the Jaguars, some that actually got drafted. So we'll take a look back at that, and then we'll talk about some of these top players. So the goal of this, to be clear, is primarily to introduce you guys to maybe some of the names that we should be watching down the road for your Jacksonville Jaguars. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and jump into this. So as far as our draft order here, I'm not adjusting this. This is just, I believe, Super Bowl odds. So Jacksonville is slated at 16th right now. I would imagine they probably finish somewhere close to this. It could really be anywhere in this range. I don't think it's lower in the sense of earlier in the draft, and it could be quite a bit later because this team could make the playoffs this year. They absolutely have the talent to do that. There are some very big questions that I have, but it could definitely be a different position than this, but we're going to leave it where it is for now. So first and foremost, we'll go ahead. We're going to look back at some of our drafts from 2024, some of the players we're looking at, and just kind of revisit that for a minute. If you guys want to jump ahead to the actual start of this draft, everything will be time-stamped. You can do that. You're more than welcome to. But our first one, and it'll be kind of hard to see some of this stuff because I'm going off videos. I don't have screenshots from over a year saved, unfortunately. Our first one, though, we did during the bye week. This was following the, I believe, 6-2 start for the Jaguars. Started off really well to the season, but it was still clear at that point that there were some offensive line issues. At this point, I don't believe we had acquired Ezra Cleveland just yet when we did this draft. Maybe we had, but there was a need on the interior, and that's why you get a name here like Graham Barton. That was a player that I was a pretty big fan of. He was a very consistent prospect throughout the year in the sense that he never really rose that far. He never really fell that far. You kind of knew going into the cycle what Barton was going to be, and he ended up going, I believe, at about 25 or so to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I think he's going to be a hell of a player. That was one of our guys we had early on. We had Jalen Polk as well. Had him at 82. Obviously, went way earlier, I think at 34 to the Patriots. TJ Tampa was a player that ended up going a little bit later, although I think his talent was definitely above where he was selected. And our final name here, Jasheen Davis, will actually be a part of this draft cycle. I scouted him last year, have not got back to him yet, but definitely will be a name I'll be watching this year. And then this is the one where I think we got a little bit closer, at least with the first pick. So Brian Thomas Jr., going back kind of to his season with LSU, it's fun to remember that he was really not a name on anyone's radar at the start. Maybe as a sleeper, but Brian Thomas Jr. started the cycle as probably a day 3 pick if he declared, and more likely a player that would return to college. And that's kind of where we got with our evaluation at the end, that he was a player that, you know, if he went back, he was for sure going to be a wide receiver 1 in this next class, or at least have a really good shot of being that. So, you know, I think that was still clear at that point that he could be that, but he really made a name for himself in that final year. Didn't have a ton of production beforehand, but hey, I mean, he ended up having a great season and warranting this kind of capital, and ended up going just 2 spots earlier, of course, to the same team. And then a lot of this, you know, you get your average stuff with mock drafts, picking the players that fall. Barton obviously didn't go at 41. Chris Jenkins went pretty close to here. Was not a player Jacksonville was interested in, I believe, which kind of shocked me. And we've mentioned it before this offseason that I really thought it was a better fit. than Mason Smith. I understood the connections that Smith had, but I feel like this team, when you're talking about what they were lacking on the interior, after the Eric Armstead signing, I felt like we needed to add to the run defense. And Chris Jenkins is a really good run defender and someone with a lot of upside as a pass rusher. And with Mason Smith, it kind of felt like his upside was close to where Chris Jenkins was now, except in the polar opposite aspect of flip run defense and flip pass rushing. Mason Smith has a high ceiling as a pass rusher. Well, Jenkins was a really good run defender, and both were probably, right now average. I guess I'd say Chris Jenkins was average as a pass rusher, whereas Mason Smith at his ceiling could be, probably an average run defender. But I didn't think much more about him in that regard. That was an area that seemed pretty weak on film with him. But, these are some names that we threw out last year, and I think some of them had some merit. I think Graham Barton, the position, made a lot of sense. You see some other names we threw down here went somewhere around there. I can't remember where Cedric Van Pran was, but I think Zinter was a third-round pick. And then our final one here, this was post-Senior Bowl, so, a lot of Senior Bowl players. That was kind of the theme of this. But, guys that I think went pretty close to these selections, although Robinson was, of course, a faller. Quinyon Mitchell, I think he would have been a phenomenal pick. Of course, he went one selection before Jacksonville's pick. He probably, he would have been my second choice at 23 if he had fallen. I had Jerzon Newton above him, but phenomenal player. Darius Robinson went a little bit earlier, and Sua Matea actually ended up going around this range and would have been available. But just kind of your look back at where we were last year. And I think ultimately it was a bit closer than what I expected. Usually a lot of these are just very hard to predict. We didn't really have a good idea last year of where Jacksonville was going to go until pretty late in the cycle, where we started hearing more about wide receiver. And you could say once Calvin Ridley walked that perhaps it was clear they were going to go towards that, but there was a lot of talk about our positions, a lot of talk about cornerback, and I thought that was possible, and even a little bit of talk about edge rusher as well. OTs, a lot of our positions thrown in there. But ultimately, I think the closest we got was probably our first one of the offseason following Week 18 and what happened then. So that's what we had last year. I thought it'd be fun to just take a look back at that. Now, getting into this cycle. First look at the draft board. I'm going to share this on the video. If I forget to, please tell me. I will throw it out there. This is available to you all for free. I don't charge anything for it because it's just my opinions, right? And I don't think that's really fair right now, especially given that I'm still pretty new to the whole scouting circle. But we have got a lot of players scouted here. We are up to 112. My plan is to get these last 8 done, hopefully within the next week or so. We'll see, of course, college football starting up. There's going to be a lot of our players I'm going to have to revisit as the games get going. But this is an interesting class. It's a class that is very loaded on the defensive side of the ball now in comparison to what we had last year, where it was a lot of offense, right? You had the first defensive pick at, I think, 14, or actually 15, with Leatu Latu going to the Colts. So it took a long time. That was pretty unprecedented territory. Now, I do think there's some offensive players that could go early in this class. I think you could see the quarterbacks rise. It's very interesting, actually, at that position, because there's like 10 to 15 guys that you can legitimately sit there and argue could be the QB1 in this class and could be a first-round pick. So it'll be fun to watch that because it's a really wide-open competition at this point. But you see a lot of our top players. You've got the corners here. These are really freaking good prospects. I think Will Johnson, just right now, is a damn near perfect prospect. Just needs to improve in run defense, but great player. We've got some pass rushers. Dual Carter is probably my favorite guy right now. Probably, I think, the best possible pick as far as just value that we would project to be there right now. I am a little bit higher on him, but that's where I stand with him. I think he's a great player. We've also got defensive tackle Mason Graham. You got JT Tuimoloau. You got more edge rushers. You got corners. I mean, it's loaded on defense. You've also got some offensive linemen. I think that could sneak into the mix, but you're looking at a lot of defensive players early on in this class, but there's a little bit of a look at this, and you guys can check out the link to this this NFL draft big board whenever you'd like. It'll be available throughout the whole year and beyond. So that's what we got here. We're going to go ahead. We're going to take a look at the depth chart, and then we're going to jump into the draft. So this is a document I put together. It's on my Twitter. I'll try to remember to put this in the description as well. This is tracking a lot of the salary cap information, the active players on the roster, kind of allowing me to see where the team sits going into the future. And so some of the nice stuff about this, you get to look at average spending, for example. You get to see if the team is overspending on a year. Because to me, when I'm looking at salary cap, it's a question of the salary cap limit, which is essentially what you're being given to spend that year, right? Imagine it as your paycheck for the year. Of course, you get a lot more than one paycheck a year, but next season, we're expecting it around $273.3 million. You want to compare what you're spending, and what you're spending to me, it's not really about the cap hit. It's more so about your average per year, because that's the value of the player at that point, the way I have this written. And right now, for Jacksonville, they end up sitting actually pretty all right next year. Now, given this is considering still the Trevor Lawrence rookie deal, sticking it with the 5th-year option value, and some players that are not re-signed on this team. You don't have Brandon Scherf. You don't have Cam Robinson. There's other guys who are not here on this roster. You can see on the depth chart where you sit. Wide receiver, we're looking good. A lot of these skill positions on offense, I think those are solidified for a while. Of course, there will be the questions next offseason, I think at least coming up, about Christian Kirk versus Parker Washington. It's not necessarily a question of is Parker Washington better than Christian Kirk, but more so is Parker Washington such a great value that you have to put him on the field over Christian Kirk. And that will be a debate for a while. But looking at the offensive line, I could see 3 positions that this team needs. Mitch Morse will essentially have, I think, $1.5 million of a second-year guaranteed. You would save about 4 if you cut him. So he's a player that I think they need to absolutely consider moving on from if he doesn't play well this season. They have a choice in that, and ultimately, if they do move on, it's 1 year, $7 million. That's okay. You can live with that. Cooper Hodges, well, I think he was a fun draft pick and still has upside in the NFL. I don't look at him as the player of the future at right guard. And Javon Foster, when we drafted him, we said, he is ideally a swing tackle. He is not the guy that you necessarily want starting. Of course, you can always be proven wrong on this stuff, but I don't think you're going into next offseason saying, all right, Anton Harrison, Javon Foster, we're set, we're not worrying about it. And obviously you need backups, but I think that's going to be another position they're looking at. So offensive line is going to be a clear need next offseason, and I think it's already a place where they need to overhaul on this team. I think it's probably the biggest weakness that we have, especially in run blocking. But you've heard that probably 100 times at this point on this channel. You get to the defensive line, I think you've got a pretty loaded line. Now, of course, there's the question now about depth behind Josh Allen, Trayvon Walker. I think that's a place they absolutely need to add. If there is a great value in the first round, I think you can draft there. And I think there's also the question that could be potentially asked at the end of the season of, is Trayvon Walker the guy of the future? I think it's fair to say after year 3 that it's about time to start putting out the verdict on him. Not all the way, not 100% final necessarily, although technically that's kind of what a verdict is, but to know, hey, we got to stop just saying developmental all the time, right? We've had 3 years. At that point, what is he? And there's a lot of polarizing conversation on him, because you go to Trayvon Walker, you look at him, it's 10-sack guy. Had nearly as many as Hutchinson. Maybe he's a great pick. If he already got 10 and he's developmental, is he going to get 15 next year? There's the other side of it, though, where I think people get a little too harsh, and they actually almost hate the guy, seemingly at times, but they say he basically walked ass backwards into the sacks. And I find myself kind of in the middle where, I mean, I guess if I lean towards one side, I would say he's more raw than a player that's arrived. But Trayvon Walker, I think, still has stuff to prove. I do think last year is in large part a result of playing next to an elite pass rusher in Josh Allen. Or I got to start calling him Joshua Hines Allen now and give him some respect on his name. But that's a big part of it, right? But he is also a player that's developed, and this year he's going into his best situation with Ryan Nielsen, a defensive line coach, a former, now the defensive coordinator, someone who is going to coach his players, going to teach his players, has the right ideas. It is exactly what Trayvon Walker needs. And for me, if you don't take a step forward again in that kind of situation, it's hard for me to imagine that happening again, or actually happening in the future at any point. I would have a lot of questions if he doesn't take another step. But we got to see. We got a whole year in front of us. But I do think that could be a conversation next offseason, especially considering that we don't know 100% for sure who's going to be in charge of this team next offseason. We don't know how this season's going to go. I think there's a lot of excitement for good reasons, but like we've said before, there's some big questions along these trenches. I mean, there are things that could absolutely damn this team to where you're shocked that they don't succeed, but it's possible because you have an offensive line that struggles. You have a defensive line with little depth on the edge, and on the interior, not really that great of play against the run. Like, that's going to hurt this team. I think you saw it last year very clearly against these AFC North opponents where they just got out physical. And so it's going to be a question again this year. We're going to have to see what happens. Trayvon Walker is a player for me that I'm very much undecided on, but I want to figure out what he is. I want to know, and I want to make my decision of the future because I do think he's a player that if he gets an extension here, it's going to be a hell of a lot of money. Because all he's got to say is, you remember what you said about me? You remember how you talked about me like I was an elite prospect, that I'm a great player? I mean, they have said a lot of good things about him. That's great, but he has to back it up. Right? And if he doesn't, it's hard to imagine that contract getting agreed upon. Now, linebacker, we aren't talking about it, right? Like, great players here, good depth. You got nothing to worry about that position. And Lucan just got extended this offseason. So, we're set there. Cornerback is going to be a spot that I think is interesting. To me, ideally, the future of this team is Tyson Campbell on the outside. It's Darby for now, filling the other side until we get someone else in, and it's Jarion Jones playing in the nickel. That is ideally what it would be. And obviously Savage is the nickel right now. That's fine. I want to develop Jarion Jones. I want him to have time to acclimate to the NFL, and I think he will be a great player down the road. So I think you're looking at corner, and when you look at the secondary, you're going to have the question of Andre Sisco. Now, I do think he'll be back. I'm going to plan for him to be back with this mock draft, but that is going to be a question of what happens there. And also, how does this regime feel about Antonio Johnson? I think that's another thing to consider because so far, and I hope I'm wrong, and maybe I am, but it doesn't seem like they're as high on him as maybe what the fans are. And I think maybe that comes with the change of the guard on the defensive side of the ball with the coaches. But we'll have to see what happens. I think that could be an area where something changes. But to summarize this, as we go into this mock draft, I think positions you're looking at, I will actually throw out something I didn't talk about. Backup tight end is in the cards, right? Doug Pearson likes his 2 tight end sets, and I think that Brendan Strange is a very questionable draft pick right now. And I think if you don't see things work out this year for him, I would absolutely consider getting another guy. And regardless, I would consider getting another guy because you're going to lose Farrell. DeGuara is only on a 1-year deal. Of course, you could bring him back if you want. But I think they're going to need someone else. I think on the offensive line, you're talking about a lot of depth. Of course, not really what we're going for today. It's a 3-round mock draft. We're not going like all the way to pick 256. But center could be a need. Right guard could be a need. I think right tackle is a need because Anton's the guy on the left in the future. There's no way you're going to convince me anyway else. On the defense side of the ball, I think you're absolutely considering adding to this rotation of pass rushers. You can absolutely consider taking an elite player there. I think linebacker set. I think you're looking at another corner. And that's kind of where you are with this team, right? So that's what we're going to look at. We'll see what we got here in this draft falling to us, but it's finally time to start as we are about 20 minutes into this video. So no trades. Not going to do any of our fancy stuff we usually do, but just straight up going to pick these selections for the Jaguars. So talking about who goes before this pick, just to mention that there are some names I probably don't think are going to go this early. And it is a class that right now, to me, you could see this with my grades. You have a few blue chip or elite players at the top. I think Will Johnson's in that category. I think Travis Hunter's in that category. I think Abdul Carter's in that category. I think James Pierce Jr. is borderline in that category. To me, he is a taller version of Dallas Turner. But obviously, Alabama's a better program at the same time, so a little bit of something to consider, but I really like him. Still, he's just a hair short because of that run defense. You get down after that, my grading scale here, A+ is early first, A is middle of the first. You get down to the fifth guy, middle of the first. You get all the way down, you have a lot of guys kind of sticking around there. At 16, you're already in the late first. So you look at these early selections, there's a pretty big drop-off. And I think a lot of the players that you're kind of forced to take around this point are at most worth the selection. I think guys are going to stand out this year. I think things are going to change. But it's not really this insanely loaded draft class after the first few guys. And I think teams are going to have to do a really good job of finding some diamonds in this mix because there's a lot of guys who are kind of ranked the same. But, some players I think probably aren't going to go this early. Ashton Genty, fun player, right? But he's a small running back. I don't think he's going 6th overall, right? Starks is a safety. I know there's crazy hype behind him, and a lot of it's justified. But 7th overall for a safety, probably not that likely. The rest of this, I could imagine, though. Now, I will say whoever picks Michael Williams, I don't know. I don't know about that selection. I'm a little scarred just watching some of these Georgia players come out recently. Now, of course, Trayvon Walker's been better than maybe what some of the people who were more of doomers expected. I don't think he's a bust by any means, but a lot of questionable players coming out of Georgia when you're drafting off that defensive line. So, getting to our guys available. The best guy on the board here is going to be Abdul Carter. It was a little bit down the board. Probably going to be our easy pick. But there's a lot of good options, right? Obviously, you're not looking at running back. I think tight end could be sneaky. Probably not going to happen. Don't think it's going to happen this early if they go after it. The interior of the defensive line is pretty loaded at this point. I do think they could use run stuffers. Kenneth Grant could be a really fun version of that, a player who could just be elite in a lot of aspects. He almost gave me a little bit of Jordan Davis vibes when I watched him. He is one of my favorite interior defensive linemen. And then you've got some interior guys. Emory Jones Jr. I have a super high grade on. I will probably end up putting him down the board a little bit because I do think it's a little high at this point. One name you're going to hear a lot of from me, though, outside of Abdul Carter, is Tyler Booker. You talk about players that are safe picks, that are great picks, and fit exactly what your team needs. Tyler Booker is the perfect name for me right now. Because I look at this offensive line, and there's a lot of things that I think need to be improved, right? Run blocking is a huge part of it. But the biggest thing is the physicality. I want to see this offensive line dominate teams. I don't want to see them get bulldozed. I don't want to see every single acquisition be focused on how much of an athlete are you? How fast do you move? Can you get downfield? I want to see these guys pulverize defensive linemen. Tyler Booker is that guy. He is a phenomenal prospect. He is, at the same time, someone who actually moves very well. He played last year at 352 pounds. It's crazy weight. It's actually getting down from that, but phenomenal player. To look at his scouting profile here a little bit, and we've talked about him before. You can go back to my summer scouting. Reminds me a little bit of Osiris Torrance, light comp there, but a lot of positives here. You know, the thing I said about him first, massive road grading guard. He imposes his will. This is a guy with elite strength on his team. He is someone who is going to kill people on the offensive line. He's someone I'm really excited about, and he might get even higher than this at the end of the day, even as a guard. You consider the market at guard as well. Actually, take a look at this. They're getting paid a lot of money now. You'll get tackles first, and the most you're getting a year, $28.1 million for Tristan Wirfs. Just signed this offseason. At guard, you're still up to $21 million. I mean, I know that's not the same, right? I know there's a difference there. This is a lot of money now. This is a valuable position. And I think the interior also sets the tone in some areas that the Jaguars just haven't done well setting the tone in. So I look at Tyler Booker, I'm like, this guy is a phenomenal prospect. You also talk about, obviously, not the top thing, right? But off the field stuff. You know, is this guy going to be a good leader in the locker room? Is this guy going to represent your franchise well? He is coming from a fantastic program to do that, being under Nick Saban at Alabama, now under Kalen DeBoer. And every interview you watch from him, you're going to love this guy. I recommend you guys go check him out if you're looking at draft prospects for this next year. He is going to be a huge name that should be linked to Jacksonville and what they need. But with that said, he's not the top guy on my board. You know, you got James Pierce Jr. here as well. We gave him the Dallas Turner comp. I think it's pretty freaking close right now from what I've seen. Some will disagree, of course. But Abdul Carter is the best guy here. You know, and I gave him the cliche Micah Parsons comp. And maybe that's too much, right? But this is an upside comp. Abdul Carter is just a special player. Just to read through the positives on him, phenomenal athlete, right? Moves really well. He has really good arm length, very, very good length overall. And, you know, while he's 6'3", doesn't matter if you're a little bit short if you got the long arms, you know, and I think that's fine height. That's why I kind of mentioned Dallas Turner here, you know, because he's our most recent guy to kind of go through that. He apparently has run a 4.48 at 250 pounds. You know, this is a ridiculously fast player. This is someone with phenomenal instincts. This is someone that, you know, if you have a scheme change, I think he can still survive if he's dropping into coverage, right? You know, he's got to keep that in mind a little bit too. It's nice to get these guys who can do it all, of course, as long as they do it at a high level. Sometimes that's not true, and that kind of kills a prospect for you because they're just okay at everything, right? You don't necessarily want that. But Abdul Carter really can do it all. This is a smart player. This is someone who has every tool that you need to be a pass rusher. There's every reason to believe he's going to be able to make this transition from linebacker to defensive end this year. And he has an actual pass rush arsenal. Fun thing to talk about for Jacksonville. You know, we don't draft a whole lot of guys who are more than developmental on the defensive line aside from when Josh Allen fell to this team. Joshua Hines Allen. But Carter has a skill set there already. He has moves. He throws everything at tackles. He is a really fun player. I think the biggest thing for me right now is run defense and tackling. Because his tackling is just very unreliable at this point. But I still would take the bet that he figures it out. And if you're talking about like a perfect pick, you're talking about a player that you steal value on that could be someone to maybe down the road set a new mark for how much a position earns. I think Abdul Carter is the kind of player who has that ceiling. You could be confident in him having a chance to actually reach that ceiling. So for me here, you know, I've got a lot of players I like. Joshua Simmons, another one here, my guy in this draft. I think he's very similar to Anton Harrison in a lot of ways. But the best guy on the board for me is Abdul Carter. It's simple. He's going to be the pick here at number 16, and we'll go to pick 48 now. I've already got my guy in mind. We'll see if he's here. Might go a little bit early because I think he's ranked pretty close around here. And, of course, just something to throw out. These rankings on here are based off of what PFF thinks, not necessarily where people are consensus at this point. Now, my guy did make it. Jaden Roberts. I want to talk about him for a second. There was a video of people asking Alabama players, who is the strongest guy on the team? And obviously, I'm not trying to just sit here and like worship Alabama for the whole video, right? But Alabama's a pretty damn good school. They got some pretty damn good players there, right? And every single person without hesitation said Jaden Roberts. They did recently, they put out the freaks list from Feldman. And he said that apparently Jaden Daniels, I believe, he can at once lift 825 pounds. Now, I wish I had more details on that. That is a ridiculous amount, right? You're talking about 600 for a lot of people at max. This is a strong, strong player. And this is a guy that when he came in last year and started his first year, which, you know, about 20, 21 years old at that time, he was phenomenal. I mean, he graded out incredibly well on PFF, and he's pretty high on my big board. He makes it into the first round for me at 28, although I'd probably be a little more comfortable taking him in the early second. But this is the guy that's just been phenomenal. I think he's good at everything for the most part. Not perfect, of course, but just a player who has been ascending, a player who has played well, and a player who did really well in some of the biggest games of the year. And we'll actually take a look at his performances against teams like Michigan just to prove that, as far as at least PFF grades, and of course watch the film as well. His highest, actually second highest grade of the year in pass protection came against Michigan, against guys like Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant. These are players that are probably first round picks. Chris Jenkins from last year, playing exclusively against that caliber of player. He was positive in run blocking, and he was damn near elite in pass protection. This is a phenomenal player, and this is someone that absolutely belongs at this point of the draft. This is someone who I think Jacksonville needs to look at very closely, especially if you're coming out of the first round without a guard. Now, I think, if this team has a successful season, you're still looking at offensive line. I think that's still going to clearly be the need. But that might be where you take a Tyler Booker, where you're not picking necessarily at number 16. Or you can pick at number 16, trade back, and go pick up Booker instead. That's always an option too. But we take Carter, of course, because of where we're at, it being a little early for a guard, especially, with one more year where he kind of has to prove some stuff. But Jaden Roberts, phenomenal teammate of his. This Alabama offensive line, if you're scouting games, if you're looking for good games to watch for prospects for Jacksonville, just watch Alabama. It's going to be an easy watch this year. Their interior of the offensive line is incredible. With Tyler Booker, with Jaden Roberts, also with Parker Brailsford. Very interesting prospect. I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. 275-pound center. You think that's awful. This guy plays like he's at least 40 pounds heavier. It's not a bad player. It's a really damn good one. And, man, I mean, he gets a Jason Kelsey comp for pretty fair reason. But Jaden Roberts, big name to talk about here. Other players, I have actually not watched this Florida guy. He'll have to get on my list. Tate Ratledge. I know there's some Jacksonville fans who like him. He is probably going to be one of the safer picks in this draft and should just be a good player. I just don't think he's going to be elite. I think the upside is a little limited, but he's a good player, a hard guy to miss on. I'd be excited about the pick. Jabbar Muhammad, probably not a big need, but is going to be a fun player. Ultra competitive, really good in coverage. Probably needs to improve run defense, though. You also got Mitchell Evans falling down here. Xavier Restrepo, if you go watch him, probably the closest guy we've had to Parker Washington since Parker Washington came out in the draft. You might like him for that reason. You kind of get down this board, though, a lot of guys that probably aren't going to go this early or are a little more questionable. So it's a pretty easy pick here at 48. We're going to take Jaden Roberts. We're going to hit right guard, and we're going to feel pretty damn good about that pick because that's a pretty damn good player. Now, thanks to the Jaguars for trading back in the 2024 NFL draft, still landing their guy at 23, we have extra picks here. We got 72 from Minnesota. We've got 109 from Minnesota. So 72 here. See a familiar name, Trevor Etienne. I think he's a good running back. We'll have to see what he does this year. I don't think he is necessarily the right pick for Jacksonville or would be the top running back to me at this point. Now, one player I really like here, not a need, but someone I think is really good is Barrett Carter. He is a phenomenal linebacker. I believe going back to my notes on him, I'll go find these really quick. Actually, I have him at 23 here. He's phenomenal in coverage. That's what he's great at. He's a smart player in that regard. Very athletic. Fun player. I think he's going to be someone that's hard to miss on. Some other options here. Wyatt Milam. I don't know if he's the best fit as far as athleticism, but Milam is a pretty reliable tackle. He might be our guy here for that reason, and that I think he's going to be a starter. At bare minimum, he is still a really valuable player in the sense that you're at least getting a really damn good left tackle to back up with. But you've got him, Kaimon Rucker, another player I really like. He is an undersized pass rusher, but he is also a really damn good pass rusher for what he does. And kind of gives me some of those Muhammad Kamara vibes, but probably a little bit higher on him. Now, two names I love here. And one of them we're not going to touch because I'm going to be straight. Should have gone like 2 rounds ago. Bear Alexander is the first one we'll talk about. Probably one of the most explosive defensive linemen I've watched in a while. He is constantly making his way through the interior of the offensive line. He is off the ball the second that the center moves. He is fast. He is explosive. He is quick to his moves. He throws the kitchen sink at players. He consistently beats guards and gives them hell to go through. And he's a player who's going to make some big plays. Now, what's weird about Bear Alexander is like off the field stuff that I don't think is really completely... It's probably happened to an extent, right? But I don't want to completely destroy the guy over what's mostly rumors. There's a lot of people, I believe he used to be at Georgia, that didn't really like him a whole lot there. And with his new team, there was rumors that he was transferring this offseason that came out. Kind of confused his whole evaluation for a while. Said they were completely fake, but just some weird stuff, we'll call it, going on with Bear Alexander. Regardless, this is a great player. This is a player who's going to be really damn good in the NFL. Someone with incredible explosion. Someone that is going to have a lot of success right off the bat as a pass rusher on the interior. And I think as a run defender, someone with a lot of upside, but also has to learn at times you're not just trying to penetrate the offensive line. Sometimes you got to hold your block. Sometimes you got to keep the lane closed and get ready to get off your block and tackle. He is a guy who just constantly wants to penetrate, and sometimes he gets out of position doing that, and guards will take advantage of it. But Bear Alexander, he's a first-round prospect to me. You know, my ranking for him here, I have got him up at 15th overall, and he can see my positives list. It's pretty freaking long on him, and he deserves those notes. The other guy I love here, and probably would be our choice at 80 if he falls, Benjamin Urasek. I think he's just a good tight end. I think he's good at everything. I think he's going to be a very easy pick, someone who's going to succeed in the NFL, someone who's going to a great situation at Georgia, and someone who's just being massively overlooked at this point. He is a player I am a huge fan of right now. Now, to mention some people who went off the board as well, just so we get some of those names out, one guy I want to throw out here of all who went is probably the one most notable guy we haven't talked about, Taj Brooks. If things go south this year for Jacksonville, if they do not have Tank Bigsby playing well behind Travis Etienne, and that pick ends up being a bust, which I don't think that'll be the case. I'm actually pretty confident in the Tank Bigsby at this point. Taj Brooks will be a phenomenal pick to play behind Travis Etienne. This guy is a bruiser. This guy just he lives to kill people on the defensive line. It is fun watching him. Go check out a highlight reel of him. He's a bulldozer, and he is exactly what this team could use to set the tone in those, third and short situations, 4th and 1, whatever it may be, goal line. If you want a player who can get it in, Taj Brooks is going to be that guy. If he hadn't gone already, he would be in consideration for this pick. I think he's going to be a phenomenal guy in the NFL. Of course, not an all-around do-it-all back, but someone who would do really well as that, change of pace or that ground and pound guy. But those are the names I want to mention here. This pick is going to be Wyatt Miley. He is the top-rated player I have on the board at this point. He actually, in fact, might have been higher than... Actually, I've got him really high on here, although probably a little out of position. I've got him up at 17. Pretty far up there, right? But this is a talented player. He's a little bit overlooked at this point. I think a safe pick, and he's a need for this team. Now, of course, you would have to transition him to right tackle. He's played on the left, I believe, exclusively at this point, as you can see. Well, he has one snap in 2023. I shouldn't say exclusively, because that's pretty important. But he's going to be our pick at 72. Big need, really good player, fell down the board. It's pretty simple, right? Now, with this pick, we've already mentioned some of our guys. I already said I'm not taking Bear Alexander just because he has no business being available here. But Jurasek, he is my top guy of what's here on the board. You also have, I believe, deep down here, some fun players. Nicholas Singleton is someone that if he can figure out the vision side of it, decision-making as a running back, I think he could be a really sneaky addition and someone who could profile actually kind of similar to what Jonathan Taylor was. It's a lofty comparison, right? But it really comes down to taking a big step forward in his decision-making because he is a phenomenal height, weight, speed combination, everything you're looking for there. Now, other fun names here, Jay Higgins, basically a clone of Foye Oluokun. The dude, every freaking play is making a tackle. Every single play. It is disgusting how many tackles he makes. I've joked before about how he's probably made more tackles in a game than the amount of plays he's been on the field. It's ridiculous. Now, final name I will throw out, Kobe Bryant. I'm excited to watch him hopefully this year in person. I'm hoping to go to a KU game. But he's a ultra competitive corner, someone who I think obviously right now more of a zone guy given his size. You'll see it listed here. He is 175 pounds. Small guy. He's got to bulk up for sure. That's something for a lot of these cornerbacks, but I think he could be good man if he puts on some size. He has that mentality that you want. I think as far as likability, he's also great in that regard. Fun guy to listen to interviews of. He also has a podcast if anyone wants to check it out. But really good cornerback and someone with a lot of upside, someone I'm absolutely looking at as a pick for the Jaguars. But given the fact that, I think he needs to put on size, I think he needs to take a step forward there, and how safe of a pick I think that Ben Jurasek is, we're going to go with my guy. And this guy might be the biggest my guy of the class. We'll have to see by the end of it, but I'm a huge fan. I would be shocked if there's not a point in the draft where I'm saying that's the way Jaguars should go. So here's our first mock draft. Way too early mock draft. We are a really long ways out, of course, from the actual draft. 8 months right now. Got a whole season to play. A lot of things are going to happen. But you got to look at some of the guys I'm a big fan of here. Some of the top players, some of our thoughts on them. You can check it out more in depth on the big board. This will be available. I will make sure it goes in the description for you all. But to summarize this, getting Abdul Carter in as another edge rusher, even whether or not Trayvon Walker, is great this year, I think it could be a need. Having 3 guys that can rotate is, I think, a necessity for this team. I think that a lot of teams would love to have that because you want to keep them fresh. You want to keep them playing at their highest level. And that really solidifies what you're looking for to get in a guy like that. I think his fit with Ryan Nielsen would be phenomenal as well. And I think he could be a player that becomes special for Jacksonville. I think Jaden Roberts is just a very easy, safe, high upside pick at right guard. I think he brings in a nice tone for this team. He's another mauler, someone who is going to kill on that offensive line. And, looking at our last guys here, Milam, I think is a very safe tackle pick. I think he's just good at about everything. I wish he was a better athlete, but still, I think he's a very good player and could end up being a first rounder. And Ben Urasek, just a great player. Good at everything you'd ask for from a tight end, someone who excites me a lot, and I think is going to have a really good season with Georgia. But that's what we got here. Appreciate you guys joining me for this, especially so early. We're not going to do a lot of these right now, of course. We're focusing more on this season, but our plans, we will have, of course, this one. We'll have our bye week mock draft. I can't remember when the bye week is this year, but we'll take a look at prospects then, kind of update where players are during the college football season. Then once we get to the off season, we'll do probably 5-6 of these videos just talking about players to watch over the few months heading up to the draft. So that's all I've got for you guys. I appreciate y'all watching. If you got any comments on these players, anyone you like, any of your my guys, love to hear them. We're going to hopefully have a video out before the season starts with Dustin Mosier, where we're going to talk about our biggest my guys of the year. Probably going to bring up about 8 prospects or so. Should be a fun one for all of you draft freaks out there. But that's all I've got today. Hope you have a great rest of your day. And enjoy the last week or so we got before the NFL season. And finally, go Jags.